One of the most common topics in IELTS speaking is your hometown. Using advanced vocabulary for this topic will help you achieve a high band score. Today you'll learn 40 essential words to give band 9 answers to hometown questions in IELTS speaking. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. Let's start with vocabulary you need to describe city areas. First, you need to know what a neighborhood is. This is a small area within a city or town where people live close to each other. So just think of a neighborhood as you have a large area and then you have a smaller area. That's a neighborhood. You could say, I live in a quiet neighborhood. So add adjectives that will help you sound more advanced. I live in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knows each other by name. Or you could say, there are a lot of young families in my neighborhood. So you can use that possessive pronoun, my neighborhood. You need to know a residential area. This is used to describe an area with mainly homes, but not businesses. So you can say, I live in a residential area that has plenty of trees and parks. So the interviewer knows that you live in an area with mainly homes, not businesses. Or start with a gerund statement to sound very advanced and say, living in a residential area is peaceful, but you depend on a car. So having that contrast as well, a positive and a negative, will help you sound very advanced. Now, the opposite of a residential area is an industrial area. This describes an area with factories or large businesses. You might say my neighborhood borders an industrial area, so it can be quite noisy during the day. So notice the verb to border. This means to be next to something or to share an edge or boundary with it. You could say this neighborhood used to be mainly industrial, but is being converted into a residential area, which is happening in many cities. You need to know what a suburb is. This is a residential neighborhood on the outer edge of the main city. So it's a neighborhood, but just think it's on the outer edge of a city. So it's usually quite far if someone says they live in the suburbs. You might say, my family recently moved to the suburbs, because it's more affordable. And native speakers will casually call it the burbs, the burbs. This is a casual abbreviation used in written or spoken English. You might say, we just bought a house in a newly developed suburb. A newly developed, an adverb and an adjective to describe the suburb. Let's talk about a rural area. Rural area. This is in the countryside, so it's far away from cities or towns. You might say, I was raised in a rural area surrounded by farms. Or you can say, I live in the country on a 10-acre property. So native speakers, we commonly use the country to represent a rural area. We use them interchangeably. Of course, you probably know downtown. This is the main business and commercial area of a city. You can also call it the city center, but in North America, we generally call it downtown. Maybe you make a hypothetical statement and say, if I didn't have kids, I definitely live downtown. Or you can say, I live in the suburbs, but I commute to downtown for work. Do you know what the outskirts are? This is the outer part of a town or a city. You can say they're building a huge shopping center on the outskirts. So notice the preposition on, and you need the article the. And outskirts has an S on it, is plural, on the outskirts. Or you can say the airport is located on the outskirts, the outer edge of the city. Let's review Metropolitan. This is used to describe big, busy city areas with lots of people and buildings. You might say, I moved from a small rural town to a large metropolitan city. Or again, use that gerund statement. Living in a metropolitan area gives you more job options. Those are the main city areas, so let's describe the types of dwellings. Perhaps you live in a detached home. A detached home. This is a standalone house that doesn't share any walls with another home. So you can say, I grew up in a detached house with a big backyard. Of course, you don't have to say detached, but it just gives more information and it makes it more descriptive. You can compare this to a semi-detached house. So this is a house that shares one wall with another house. So you can say, I live in a semi-detached house in the suburbs. Native speakers also refer to this as a side-by-side. So if you ever hear, I live in a side-by-side, that's a semi-detached house. One style of house that's very common in North America is a row house or a townhouse. So this is a group of homes in a continuous row, each sharing walls on both sides. You might say, I used to live in a row house or a townhouse close to downtown. Now, generally, native speakers use them interchangeably, but technically a townhouse is a style of row house that's very tall and narrow, usually 2 to 3 floors. But most modern row houses are townhouses in North America. Of course, you know what an apartment is. This is a unit inside a larger residential building, but it's important to know that you rent this unit. So you might say, I've been living in an apartment downtown for the last 5 years. So here downtown describes where the apartment is. And compare this to a condominium. Native speakers almost always refer to this as a condo. This is an apartment that you own rather than rent. So you can say, I recently bought a condo downtown that has a large gym and a rooftop terrace. And using the word condo doesn't sound like slang. It sounds like what a native speaker would use. Let's compare this to a high-rise. Of course, this is a very tall building with many floors, and it's usually used for apartments, condos, or offices. So you could talk about how you work in a high-rise. Or you could say, I recently bought a high-rise condo. So notice high-rise is the adjective. It comes before the word condo. Downtown, that's the location, that has a large gym and a rooftop terrace. Now, you could also use the word skyscraper. This is an extremely tall building, so taller than a high-rise. Now let's review some vocabulary to describe the layout of your hometown. You might talk about a historic district. This is an older part of a town with buildings that have historical value. You could say, I bought a condo in a historic district, so renovations have been very slow because there are a lot of rules and regulations around renovating historic buildings. Or you can say, most of the museums in my city are in the historic district. You'll probably talk about the public transportation system. So this is buses, trains, subways, and other transportation options available to the public. You might say, unfortunately, my city has a very outdated transportation system. So outdated is the adjective. It means not modern. Or you can say, thankfully, my city has a modern and reliable public transportation system. And then you can go on and describe your experience with it. Green space is an important concept, more and more important. This is land reserved for parks, gardens, or natural areas. So you might say, I'm lucky to have a lot of green space in my city. So notice we generally use this as a singular concept. You could say the government is trying to create more green space downtown. So simply allocate land for parks or natural purposes. Do you know what amenities are? These are useful services and facilities that make life easier. So shops, schools, hospitals, gyms, all of these are amenities. You can say we moved to a neighborhood with more amenities, and then you can describe what those amenities are. Or you can say, I live in a rural area that lacks basic amenities. I have to drive 15 minutes just to get milk. So providing a specific example is a great way to sound more advanced. Let's talk about infrastructure. This is basic systems that support an area. So think of roads, electricity, water, internet. That's infrastructure. You can say the infrastructure. Notice the infrastructure in my hometown has improved a lot recently. And we use this as a singular concept to describe all infrastructure. Let's review waterfront, because this is a sought after area, an area that many people want. This is an area that is along water. Any type of water, whether it's the ocean, a small river, or even a pond, you can say it's waterfront. So you can say, my parents just bought a waterfront condo, or whatever type of home, a waterfront detached home. So waterfront comes before the type of home to describe it. You can say downtown is always bustling because of its waterfront. So downtown is along the water. That would be quite beautiful. So notice I use to be bustling. Notice that T is silent. Bustling, bustling. This means to be very busy, full of activity. So it's a great adjective to use. Of course, you probably know what a tourist attraction is. This is a place that many visitors go to see. You can say our main tourist attraction is, and then whatever it is, the old castle, for example. Or you can say the waterfall is a popular tourist attraction in this region, this area, this suburb, whatever type of vocabulary you want to use. Now compare this to the word touristy. Do you know what this means? Touristy. Well, this is used to describe places that are full of tourists or designed mainly for tourists. But keep in mind, this sounds negative. Whenever I'm in a new city, honestly, I try to avoid touristy areas. Maybe someone says downtown has become too touristy, or the restaurants along the river are touristy. Well, to me, that sounds like the quality of the food is not very good, is going to be very busy, and it will be very expensive. Touristy. When describing your hometown, you'll probably talk about monuments. So this is a statue or structure built to honor a person or event. You can say there's a monument in the main square for soldiers who died in the war. So it's to represent them, to honor them. Or you can say they built a new monument to celebrate the city's 100th anniversary. So again, use adjectives and adverbs to sound more advanced. Let's talk about people and community. So of course, locals. These are people who live in a particular place. So you can say the locals, the because they're specific to that place, and plural because it represents all of them. The locals in my town are very friendly to visitors. Or as a child, I knew almost all the locals on our street. You can use the adjective tight-knit. Tight-knit. This is a community where people have a strong, close relationship. So you can say, I grew up in a tight-knit community. So tight-knit is the adjective that describes community, where everybody knew each other. Or you can say, everyone in my neighborhood is tight-knit, so very close. You can use multicultural. This means having many different cultural or ethnic groups. You can say my neighborhood is very multicultural with people from all over the world. Or again, use a gerund statement. Growing up in a multicultural environment taught me to be open-minded. You can use welcoming. This means friendly and open to new people. People in my hometown are very welcoming to newcomers. The community center has a very welcoming atmosphere. So welcoming is the adjective that describes atmosphere. Perhaps you can talk about a working class neighborhood. This is an area where most people have lower paid or manual jobs. I live in a working class neighborhood with mainly small houses. Compare this to a middle class neighborhood. This is an area where most people have stable, well-paid jobs and comfortable homes. My parents moved to a middle-class neighborhood when I was young. Or you might talk about the aging population. So this is an area with mainly elderly people. You can say my hometown has an aging population because most young people move to the city for work. You can talk about commuters. Commuters. These are people who travel daily or regularly between home and work or school. You can say it's not easy being a commuter. So this is a noun, a commuter, a person who commutes. A commuter when you live on the outskirts. Remember that? On the outskirts. Now let's talk about lifestyle. You might talk about the cost of living. This is the amount of money needed to pay for basic expenses. And notice you use the article the cost of living. Those are the exact words you need. The cost of living in my city is quite high, which means it's expensive to live there. Or you can say we moved to the suburbs because the cost of living is lower. So it's less expensive to live there. Or you can say many people in my hometown are struggling with the increasing or the rising cost of living. So the cost of living, and then you use increasing or rising to describe it. How about hectic? Hectic. This means very busy and full of activity. And it sounds negative because it's often stressful. So you can say living downtown, the gerund statement, living downtown can be quite hectic, especially on weekends. And then you can describe all the activities that take place that make it hectic. Or you can say, I moved to the countryside. Remember, that's a rural area. You could also just say, I moved to the country because the pace of city life was too hectic for me. Of course, you can use safe. This means not dangerous and with low crime and few risks. Parents like this area because it's safe for children. You can describe it as vibrant. This means full of energy, life, and activity, but it sounds positive compared to hectic, which sound negative. You can say, my city has a vibrant nightlife. Now you could describe your area as sleepy. So this isn't describing a person, it's describing an area, but think of it as a quiet area with little activity. So it's an alternative to saying boring, but it's more common to use sleepy in this context. So you can say many people complain that this city is too sleepy. There's not a lot to do, it's boring. Or you can say, after living downtown for years, I'm enjoying my sleepy rural area. So sleepy generally sounds negative, but you can use it in a contrasting way to show that you're enjoying the quiet pace of life. How about congested? This means too full of people or vehicles. So you can use this as a replacement to busy to sound more advanced, busy or crowded. You can say the main roads are extremely congested during rush hour. So again, a replacement to busy or crowded. Or you can say we only have one good cafe in my area, so it can get very congested in the morning. Sounds more advanced than saying busy or crowded. Now, hopefully you don't describe your area as rundown. This describes buildings or areas that look old, damaged, or not well cared for. And you can use this to describe a person as well. You can say, unfortunately, some parts of my city have become quite run down. So you can isolate a certain area of your hometown and describe it as run down, and maybe provide some examples or the reason why. Or you can say our neighborhood was becoming run down, so the locals organized a fundraiser to spruce things up. To spruce up. This means to make something look cleaner, nicer, or more attractive. And you can use that with people as well. Let's review up and coming. This is a place that is developing quickly and becoming more attractive. So it's in progress. If you use up and coming, it's in progress. You can see my neighborhood was quite sleepy when I first moved here, but now it's up and coming. So more buildings, more cafes, more shops, more people, more energy. Or you can say, I live in an up and coming area with lots of new stores and restaurants. And finally, gentrification. This is when a poor area becomes richer and original residents are often forced out. But it's a very common thing taking place now with our growing population. So it's quite common to describe this. You can say, I lived in this neighborhood through gentrification. So you were there when it was the original small houses, but then they started tearing those down and building more expensive houses, condos even, and more affluent people moved in. Or you can say many locals are moving out because gentrification has increased the cost of living. Now you have so much vocabulary to sound advanced and get a high score on your IELTS when you're describing your hometown. Do you want me to keep helping you improve your vocabulary? If you do, put yes, 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 yes in the comments below. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And here's another lesson I know you'll love. Watch it now.